All right, welcome to the May 19th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll have some people getting logged in. So my name is Greg Ondo. I work with Yamaha Corporation in America. I work as a Steinberg specialist, and we'll be going through different questions that were sent in today. If you haven't been on a Hangout before, you have the ability to send questions in advance to Club Cubase at steinberg.de, or you could just enter the comments in the chat field. I'm going to do a quick test to make sure our audio is working. Okay, and it seems like the audio feed is fine. So if you're watching this live, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself. If you're watching the replay of this, you can skip ahead maybe 8 to 10 minutes. We'll let people get logged in, but you could just introduce yourself in the comments field and tell us where you're from. That'd be great. And we'll let people get logged in. And for those people, again, watching live, just introduce yourself and ask questions. So you could ask questions in the comments field, and we'll try to go through them chronologically. And if it doesn't really help so much if you ask the same question repeatedly in the comments field, it just kind of clogs it up. And we'll try to get to as many questions as completely and succinctly as possible, so we get a lot of different topics. So I appreciate that. So we'll just go ahead and let people get logged in. Let me just turn off my phone so we won't hear people calling me, ringing in the middle of the seminar. And like many of you, my family is at home while I'm doing this. So my son is watching some TV. He's finished his schoolwork for the day. So there's a strong possibility that he may interrupt me to change shows or change movies. So I may have to do that. And you may hear my wife, who's working directly above me, and there's a new home construction going on outside my window. So I think they're working inside today. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions, but let's go ahead and we see people are getting logged in. We'll try to have by later tonight an index of all the different topics that we covered today, so you could go through different questions or particular topics. So feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself. So I'm seeing some returning users, which is great. There's some questions already coming in. So I see Sir Robert from Atlanta. We have Pablo from Galicia, Spain. I probably pronounced that wrong. My apologies. All right, so we have Ted back. All right. Okay, so we have Robbie from Dallas. Okay, let's see. All right. We have Taylor Sapp from Pine Grove. Good to see Taylor. All right, so we have Millard Brown from Pennsylvania, who's been a loyal attendee since we kind of been doing the Hangouts this year. All right, so we have London, Norway, Switzerland. Another person from London. We usually have a pretty strong UK contingent of attendees. All right, so we have Spain, Miami, Riverside, California, Sweden. I've always wanted to travel there. All right, so we have Fort Washington right across the river from me. I could probably swim across there. All right, just right across the Potomac. It's pretty close. I'm just in Alexandria, Virginia. So, okay. So we have Memphis, Tennessee, Weatherford, Texas, New Haven. Okay. Okay, just seeing question on quick controls. All right, so we have Frederick, Maryland, not too far from me. Orlando, good to see you, Vinny, longtime attendee. All right, we have Canada, Toronto, Costa Rica, India, Tel Aviv, Portugal, Nepal, Holland, Germany, Spain, UK, Los Angeles. Okay, we have Hampshire. All right, Pennsylvania, Norway, Cleveland. Been there many times. Orlando, Sweden, Russia. All right, so we have Milwaukee, Seoul, Bradenton. Been there many times. We have Italy, Thailand, India, Singapore, San Diego. Iran, Minneapolis. I see Alguien de Hispanic. I think that's question in Spanish, maybe. It's been a long time since I've had my high school Spanish. Okay, so just interesting question. Who here would run Cubase on Atari? I was one. All right, so we have Colombia, Iran, Slovakia, Stockholm. Good to see Jan. Okay. All right, more people are getting logged in. We'll give it a couple more minutes and get started. Macedonia, Brazil. So it's fascinating to see people from all over the world attend the Hangouts. Makes it more interesting for me. Okay, same question on Warp Tool, working the picture. We could do that. Question, do I speak Spanish? Very, very little, un poco. So I took a couple years of Spanish in high school, but that was many, many years ago. But I did get to go to Spain a couple times and loved going there and visiting there. So, all right. So more people are getting logged in. Okay, we'll get started here. Maybe another 90 seconds or so. All right. So we have Istanbul, Turkey. It's Republic Day there. I did not know. All right. So we have England, from sunny England. Okay, seeing a question on importing and changing files. We'll get to that. All right, so we have Humboldt, Texas. All right, give it a couple more minutes. We have some more people logging in. All right, Netherlands, Montreal. It's a beautiful city. All right, we have Israel. All right, we have a German in Bulgaria. Canary Islands, Spain. All right, good to see Nick on a Hangout. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll just scroll through. So we got some questions that were sent in advance. So question. Please read the whole question, which will spell over 2 messages. Thanks. I finished my track and structure. What is the best order of finalizing production? Song contains VSTI and audio tracks. Do I bounce or render to audio stems before final mix down using group channels and then apply final effects fade ins and outs, or do I just do all that before, etc.? Can you outline a rough cheat sheet or on guideline for best workflow for decent mix to rendering a final master wave? It really can depend upon what particular, like if you're finalizing the project yourself, or if you're handing it off to someone else. So there's absolutely nothing wrong if everything's working fine on your computer in your project to just simply do, and I'll just go to kind of a bigger project here, just to show as an example. Excuse me. Let's clear my throat. So if we have kind of a large project going on, let me just see if I could mute some of my volumes here quickly. So, if we have a large project that's going on with lots of groups and your computer is running it fine without any issues, there's no problem with just simply doing your export audio mix down and doing your stereo mix. Sometimes people, if they're handing it off to someone, may choose to, do 2 different stems. So sometimes film composers may deliver stems of all their brass, all their strings, all their winds, all their synths, all their sound effects as separate stems, and someone else mixes those stems. But it really doesn't matter. So, if you're handing it off to someone that's going to mix your file and you don't necessarily want to have them, be able to adjust your levels. Sometimes, you may just export, stem files and then they can mix and add effects. But if you're doing it all yourself, you could really just go, if your computer is not running the project fine, there's no problem just simply exporting just a stereo mix file. So once you export the stereo mix file, you're not going to have any issues. If you're working with someone or you're sending it to a mastering engineer, some mastering engineers will prefer to get stems of maybe the bass, guitars, keys, vocals, lead vocal as stems. Some mastering engineers don't feel that makes the project better, that it just kind of is delaying the inevitability of actually mixing the project and putting it in the mastering engineer's hands. So if you wanted to take your whole project and just bounce it down to a stereo file in Cubase, many times people will do stems if their project is getting too big, and we'll render in place or do stems to free up processing resources. But it's not necessary, and it doesn't really, some people may adjust, compression on stems and stuff like that, but you could kind of do that all with the live setting, so it doesn't really gain you much. Some people may find that it works better on a project once and they kind of continue that same workflow over and over again, but you don't have to go to stems, you don't have to do groups, you don't have to do rendering. If you're kind of the one handing off the final mix down file, you could just simply do that without having to render out all of your effects. It's not going to change the sound any. So it's really just a personal preference on who you're delivering the files to. If there's someone else that's doing a step after you in your production process. If not, just simply do a stereo mix down. Okay, so we have a question. I hope that makes sense. So what is the difference between rendering track and bouncing? Thank you. So if we render a track, if we just choose to do like a bounce selection track, so let's say if I have a lot of different edits and maybe I've cut something out here and I wanted to render these particular files here. So instead of having, one, two, three, let's say four audio files in silence, if I choose to just do a offline bounce selection. So if I just come here and choose bounce selection, I could choose to take those 4 files, and if I click on replace, it would automatically just replace that with a separate audio file. But it's not going to allow me to have the flexibility of working directly with processing. So when we do render in place, we're going to have the option of having that turn into just one file, one event, separate events, block events. I could choose to have it just dry. I could choose to include the inserts, EQs, and channel strips. I could also add add the send effects, and then add the complete, which would be the insert, sends, channel strips, and EQs plus the master effects. So at that point, you have more flexibility with processing, and we could think of the bounce selection as just kind of consolidating different audio files. So render in place will allow you to include different processing options, whereas bounce selection would just kind of take it and turn it into one particular file. Okay. Okay, so I think I went through all those. Okay, so moving on. When you switch to the stereo combined panner and put both channels to center, is it the same as a mono signal, mono summed combined? And additionally, how different is this from going into the stereo enhancer and dialing everything left? And then still, is there a difference between a mono switch on a plugin? So if I have, I think I could do this I think I might have a nice piano part in this recording. Let me just take it here, see if I could, okay. So here I'm going to have just a stereo piano recording. And if I wanted to go to my panner, if on stereo tracks, you could have a balance panner, which is default. So we could pan like so. Or if we click on the lower right-hand corner, we could have the stereo combined panner. So if I wanted that to be very mono, we could combine, or if I wanted to be more stereo spread. And we could also just kind of have a narrow field, but kind of panned a little bit left and right. Or if I wanted to actually switch it, if I keep going up, I could reverse the panning. So that's some of the things that you could do with that. So you could, in essence, kind of take a very kind of natural stereo file, and if I wanted to make it very mono, or more stereo. And if we do one of the plugins, so let's say if I go to spatial, I could go to my stereo enhancer plugin. So I'll make this so I can make that wider sounding or very narrow. If you kind of look at the metering, you can kind of see some of the differences. So if we make this where it was. So if we're trying to get kind of a stereo source to sound mono, you could definitely do that with the stereo combined panner. If you wanted to sound more stereo, you could use the stereo enhancer and then kind of change the perspective to be more mono or more stereo, depending on your choice right there. So they'll kind of get you to the same area. But if you wanted to go wider and narrower and maybe automate that, that's when you'd probably want to use the stereo enhancer plugin as opposed to the panner, because it can't really take it and increase the width. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, I'd like to experiment with the effects of phasing two mono synth tracks by gradually offsetting one forward in time. Is there a track-based value that will delay its negative starting point?" So if we have two different audio files here, let's say I'll just duplicate this particular track. So just right click and we'll take our piano. So what you could do is, there's a couple ways of doing this. So if you wanted to do, let's say we'll play both of these together. If I want to take one of the tracks on a global track basis, we could just come over here and we could adjust the pre-delay. So, and this will be in values of milliseconds. So if I wanted this to play back 40 some milliseconds earlier, this particular piano track, let me play back. I'll do this track, sorry, the wrong one. So here, if I wanted that, to be, so let's say if I wanted this to be -10, so it's by itself, and with -10, let's do -60. Now, what some people do, there isn't a way to automate this. So that's going to be kind of global. But if we wanted to select kind of different events here, we could just select the start time, and we could change your start time of each of the events, and we could alter that. So if we wanted to make this start a little earlier, this to start a little later, just from the info line, we could choose to change the start time for the different events here. So that's another method that you could do with two different tracks, is just by going into the info line and changing it. Some people I know in digital audio want to think of it like a flanging type of thing, where the old school method of putting your thumb on the analog tape and kind of applying more pressure to do that. So that doesn't necessarily translate to digital audio workstations, but you could, very easily just kind of set different start points. But there isn't a way to necessarily kind of automate that. You could have, you could pick predetermined spaces to have it and change. Like if you wanted to add more tension during a particular part of the music or part of the audio file, you could do that. Okay, so hi Greg, when bouncing down audio clips, we get the option to replace clips. What would be a usage example of bouncing down and not replacing the clips? I just wondered. Sometimes I've seen people, maybe if they have to hand off files to someone. So let's say, you have a lot of edits, and you realize that perhaps, let's say this was take 1, take 3, like it's a comp take, and you wanted the flexibility of having all of the separate files to change or to edit further, but you needed to hand off the file to someone else. So at that point, we could do a bounce selection. And as we do this, we could choose no. And then if you need to hand off a file, and this is often used when people are doing like very specific types of editing, where maybe they don't want to give away the recipe of how they did particular edits. I know a lot of producers, that will spend a lot of time doing very kind of proprietary edits to get particular effects, and they don't want to necessarily hand that off to someone. So at that point, they could just take that file that will go into your audio pool. And at this point, you could just say, I'm going to hand them the one file that it will be a consolidation of all the different edits. And if they don't like it, this way I could just say, okay, I'm going to take this and I can make a tweak and change the volume level if needed. So often it's to make sure, like when handing off files to someone else, people will often choose not to replace the file, and then the bounce selection is what they pass on and share with other people. Okay, so good to see Robbie from Dallas, longtime Hangout attendee. Okay, so question from Ed. In doing 5.1 mixing within Cubase, what's the best way to send a track to LFE only? All right, great question. So let's say if I had a audio connections here, and I'll go to my outputs, and I will add a 5.1 bus. Okay, so let's say we're gonna have left, right, center, LFE, or like the subwoofer for low frequency effects, and the left and right surround. So if I add a track and I wanted to be to go solely to my LFE, so say I add my audio track. In the routing page, all I'd have to do is take it to my 5.1 out, and you could actually just select a particular channel within your 5.1 out. So just take it directly to your LFE, and that way this particular track is only going to be routed out to your LFE or your subwoofer. All right. So let's go ahead and move on. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. All right. Okay, so we have a question. How do I delete a workspace? So let's say if we've set up workspaces, which are kind of pre-done workspaces. So let's come over here and I'll just create a workspace for maybe vocal edits in Vari Audio. So let's say if I just come here, I'll take that and let's go ahead and we'll add a workspace to the project, and I'll just call it delete me. Okay, so now I can see different workspaces in this project. So if I want to go to, score editing, or let's say, okay, let's just pop back to our delete me, would come over here so we could see that particular setup. So if we go to organize at this point where I had the delete me workspace, this is a project. At this point I could select that and just click on delete, and then that workspace has kind of been eradicated. So go to workspaces to organize, and then just choose to select it and then choose to delete. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for all the great questions from people. Okay, is a question. Hi, Greg. Does it make a difference in the quality of sound after rendering the MIDI instrument tracks to audio tracks? No, you're not going to improve the quality of the sound. Some people may find it different if they then take the audio files and process them, but you're not going to really change the overall sound quality by rendering it first to audio and then doing a mix down. So it's really the same digital data information. Okay, so just see, when will there be Hangouts for Absolute? We're always, answering questions on VST Instruments, Nuendo, Wavelab as well. So if you have a question on one of the tools within Absolute, feel free to ask it. It's not, even though it's kind of branded Club Cubase, we're always, happy to answer any Steinberg software, hardware question. Okay, so you see a question, why would my tempo option, why would my detect tempo option be grayed out after selecting an audio clip. So let's say if I'm here, just activate this particular project. So let's say if I go to my project menu, the tempo detection, and let me just check something. If I set it to apart, see if that makes a difference. Okay, so if your tempo detection is grayed out, there's two different modes of audio events. You could have them as events and parts. So try selecting the audio event, go to your audio menu, and choose dissolve part. And now that you've done that, I think your tempo detection will become visible again. So sometimes a part is a collection of multiple edits. And if you, if you find yourself you've done a zillion edits and cut and did different types of, gain adjustment and stuff like that and compiled multiple takes, that's when you could select all those and do the bounce selection. And from the bounce selection, choose to do, replace the events, and then that will turn it into an event. But just try to select your data here and just click on dissolve part, and then I think you should be able to see the tempo detection. Okay, so we have a question. I have a QC controller, the 6 knobs linked to quick controls. Please review track quick controls versus the ones on the VST. What are pages? How to assign QC control to other. I haven't looked at the QC control in a long time, but so if you have your QC control, I think there's a mode within the software editor where you could choose to put it into quick control mode or into like a MIDI CC mode. So you kind of hit a button and it's doing quick controls. You hit another button, it's doing just MIDI CCs. And where we could assign that. So I think if you go to your studio setup, once you have the quick controls installed, you'll see it appear here under remote devices. And once you select it here at this point, you could choose for the MIDI input and output. So when we go to our VST quick controls, you'll probably see like the QC, the CMC QC drivers, set that for your inputs and outputs. And this, I believe, will kind of automatically be mapped. Going to particular tracks, you could select a track here, and then if it's an audio track, we could go to your quick control settings, and then you have different presets. So you could say, let's just come over here. If I wanted to do, excuse me, all my volume, pan left, or I wanted to do my EQs or my send levels, or you could just kind of make these do any particular thing. So you could say, I wanted to come over here and let's go to my channel strip for, my EQ, and I could adjust, you could set up your own 8 kind of different parameters. So if you wanted to have one of your quick controls that does, pre-gain, another one that, will do, phase and stuff like that, you're able to kind of set up your different parameters. So, and I think what's handy about switching between the quick control mode, and I haven't worked with this in a couple years, and the CC mode is like sometimes you may have like an orchestral instrument that you may want the CCs to be like, MIDI control, main volume, expression, modulation, and you could use the knobs for that, hit the button, and then go directly to the quick controls knobs. But I'll review it after the Hangout just to make sure. It's been a couple years since I've used that, because in my own studio I kind of tend to use the CC121. Okay. All right. Also, Prague, Czech Republic was checking in. So I see a question, is there a possibility in Cubase to slow down the playback, like slow motion in video editing? So if we have a track, let's say I have a track like this, what I could do is if I go into my pool window, I could see that these are all going to be kind of set to, roughly the same tempo. And then we want to make sure that there is a tempo set. And then we could select all the files. I'll just hold down the shift key, select the bottom, and I'll do the shift key this time instead of making an error, and make sure that they're in musical mode. So if I wanted to just change the tempo, I could now just type in a tempo, and once tracks are in musical mode, I could hit 80 beats a minute from 100. Or let's do 60. Or let's make it 120, so we'll double the tempo here. So you can do that for any audio track that's in musical mode, and MIDI will follow as long as well, unless you've told it specifically to be in time linear mode. So if you wanted to kind of mimic like a slow down, you could do stuff like that once it's in musical mode. Okay, so let's move on. I'm also seeing people that suggested, this is a good point too, like for editing purposes, if you wanted to, scrub and then scrub a track, you could just kind of come here. So let's say if we zoom in, if you're looking for just like an edit. And you can do DJ scratches as well if you want to. All right. Thanks for all the great questions. Just going through our feed. And if you want to send questions in advance, again, you could email them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And if you include your email address, often I could write back to you. Some reason it gets forwarded to my email, then I don't see the email address. So just a heads up with that. Okay, so it says, hi, trying to download Cubase AI because I got the UR22C. I got it in another 2 computers, all Mac, but now I can't. Asking reactivation, but Steinberg is not send me the new number. Any clue? So generally, you have one license per program. What a lot of people do is just use a USB E licenser, and you could transfer the license to the USB E licenser. But there's also, if you go to your My Steinberg account, you could ask for another activation code for your AI, which is often used. The process is often used like when you have a new computer, and it should be able to process your request for you. Okay, let's move on. All right, so we have people from Berlin, Sweden, Russia. Okay. Okay, so it says, does VST Connect Pro belong in a plugin folder called Network? If so, why doesn't it show up in VST Cloud list? So I've seen some people, with Cubase by itself, we get VST Connect SE, which allows you to do 2 tracks, and we also have VST Connect Pro, which is a separate purchase. So I've seen some people, and we've gotten this a couple of times on the Hangouts, where people will download the version, the paid for version, without getting the license for it and install it, thinking that they need the Pro version, but the SE is what's licensed with Cubase, and you'd have to purchase the additional license for VST Connect Pro, which will give you up to 16 tracks, and MIDI recording capability. So if you've installed it without the license, you may still see it show up under the network list for plugins. So if we come over here and look at your network list, we could see the VST Connect Pro. So it may show up there, and without it being licensed, it may not show up here. So check to make sure that you have the license for it, and you would need to activate the license for the VST Connect Pro within the eLicenser program. So if you could let us know if you've just installed it or if you've activated the license. All right. I'm glad I didn't totally mispronounce my Spanish earlier. Thanks for the kind words, Pablo. So my Spanish is very rough. So okay. Okay, question. I've got a Behringer X Touch for automation. It regularly disconnects from Cubase, and I have to restart it to get it to interface again. Others report the same. Any ideas, tips? I have the latest firmware. Depending on your computer, and this happens with a lot of PCs, you may have to go into when stuff kind of gets disconnected, and I've seen this with a number of audio interfaces. Where sometimes the PC's USB bus to save power, because a lot of times people power devices off of the USB bus, like your phone or drives. But often the USB bus could be running in like a power mode for eco or green mode, where the power gets cut off to that, and that often can screw up audio interfaces or control surfaces. Things are connected via USB. So go into like your, and I'm sure if you Google like, disable power management on USB ports in Windows, that you'll be able to find the settings if you're running Windows. So that's the first place that I would look, and often kind of just disabling the power management can do the trick. And, obviously there's a lot of computers and laptops especially that are judged on their battery life. So once their battery, for them, it's much better to have an extra 30 minutes of battery life and kind of throttle the CPU and different components so that the battery lasts longer. And I've had a lot of people, once they've disabled the power management on your USB ports, that, have, a big improvement in overall experience with their components that are connected to it. Okay, going through different questions. All right, so we have Slovakia, more people. All right, from all over the world. It's wonderful. Okay. Okay, so it says, hey, Greg, could you go over using the warp tool when working with picture? I had a cue at the end of the project session. Everything fell out of time when I worked on an earlier cue in the session. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I think I have a project set up for this. Let me see if it's still my... Okay. So there's a couple of different functions that the warp tool could be referring to here. There's audio warp, but there's also the time warp. So if I wanted to come here, let's say I have my video window, and I'm just kind of playing along. Excuse the nonsensical music here. So let's say if I wanted a particular number of measures right from this point, and I'll just go ahead and zoom, and I'm assuming that this might be the time warp tool with the video. So let's say I turn on my click track. So I wanted to go to right there. So I want measure 20 to start right at that moment in time. So what I would do if I wanted kind of an even number of bars is just grab my time warp tool and I say measure 20 starts right there. And I want measure 24 to end right at that moment in time where we see kind of the logo at the Steinberg office. So that's where measure 24 is. So now that I do this, we could start and we will now have kind of like an even number of measures. And it'll just insert the tempo change for you. And at that point, you could do that. So, but as you do this, the one thing to kind of be aware of is that you could have MIDI events in like a musical mode or in like a musical time base or linear. So if I wanted these particular tracks to always kind of follow the timing and tempo, I would make sure that these tracks, we see this little mode right here called musical mode. But let's say if I had like a cymbal sound that was just like a kind of thing that was tied into a specific visual element. So let's say if I wanted that to start, right here, I wanted a swoosh sound. I would probably want that track to always be in linear mode. So linear mode, if I change the tempo, will keep its particular setting based on the actual time versus the actual bar and beat. So if your items shifted inadvertently after you did kind of warping, you want to make sure that those tracks that you want to kind of conform to the new tempo fit and are in musical mode, and that tracks that you always want to occur at the same specific, like maybe for visual reference, have those tracks occur in linear mode, and then you could pick and choose which tracks will follow the tempo and which don't. But once you kind of select the audio warp tool here, that way you could just say, at this very specific point in time, that's where I want it, right where we see the subway station outside the Hamburg office. That's where you want that bar to be. So hopefully that helps. If not, or if I'm described the wrong warp tool, because it could also be audio warp, just let me know, and hopefully we'll try to get that figured out. Okay. Hi, Greg. Please, how to trigger MIDI keyboard with a drum? I've seen once doing this using the gate in the channel strip, but I forgot how. So let's see. So you want to trigger a MIDI keyboard with a drum. So if we go back, I'm not sure if this is maybe for drum replacement. So if you're looking to do drum replacement, I'll just activate this project here. Like, let's say you want to take the drums of one track and do like a sample replacement. So let's say if I have a drum sound, I'll click on the right icon this time. So where I have, so just a Groove Agent kit loaded up, and I could leave that channel selected. And if I wanted to do drum replacement, I could double click here and go to my hit points. And we could adjust the threshold. And at this point, I could just say create MIDI notes. And we could choose to put this onto C1, where my kick is. And I could retain the dynamics. And now it's now just triggering the kick from Groove Agent that we saw earlier. So if I want to make that louder. And I can mute the kick tracks in the audio. So if that's what you want to do to take kind of MIDI and trigger, it says trigger MIDI keyboard with a drum. So that will, generate the MIDI information directly from the drum part. So again, just select the source, go into double click, go into the sample editor, go to hit points, and then make sure we have the threshold set appropriately so we're not triggering, tracks that are bleeding through. And then just click on create MIDI notes, and that's how you could do drum replacement quite easily. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. How can I import and change multiple audio files to my project and change their bit rate at the same time? So there's actually a preference for this. So if we go to your preferences, and it's one of these preferences that you have the option to turn off once, and then people look for how to get it back on again. So I think if we go to editing audio, we could say open options dialog box. But we could also just say convert all files to the project folder. So that would take all the files and move it to the project folder. And then we could also choose to convert to project settings, which would be our, the project bit depth and the sample rate. So once you have those two things checked, so you could have it every time you do it, have it open an options dialog box and choose those things, or just simply come here, and as you import, it will automatically convert. If you have all the files already in your project and in your pool folder, where everything is basically, stored for a particular project, and they're all different sample rates and bit depths. You could have multiple bit depths within the Cubase project, but you could also just right click in a folder, and then you could choose to convert files. So at this point, we could convert the option. So you can say, okay, we want to convert them all to the common sample rate, all to bit depth. If we want stereo interleave to all be split, if we want to change different file formats, if you wanted to make new files, replace files, or new and replace in pool, you have those options just by going into the pool window from the media menu, and then right clicking and choosing convert files. So a couple different ways to skin that cat. Okay, so we saw a question, how to do drum replacement in Cubase. I think we just covered that. Let's move on. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay. All right, so my timeline just jumped on me. Give me a second here. Thanks for all the patience. Okay, so it says I've used Cubase and Atari, but just a comment. I've used Cubase and Atari, but I didn't own it at the time. I was about 8 years old, if that counts. I got my copy around 94 on PC. I was 13 then. That's great to still be a Cubase user since 94. It's been great. Okay, so we saw a question on drum replacements. I think we just covered that. Okay, so question. Can you show them the setup Windows layout overview function and how it works? I find it very useful for navigating and zooming in and out. Same goes for toggling the auto scroll function. So a couple things. If we go to our Windows layout here in the upper right hand corner, you could pick and choose what different components of the window are visible. So if you don't want the right zone or left zone or transport or lower zone, you could also have kind of status line and info line enabled, disabled. So you could kind of pick different functions here to see visible. I like having a lot of options, so I could just quickly select something, see the info line, see the project overview, different functions. And they also mentioned, for the auto scroll function. So there's a couple of options here that a lot of people don't know. So let's say if we're zoomed in, we could choose to hit the F key, and we have different auto scroll functions here. So we could have it do kind of a page scroll. So when we get towards the end of a particular file, so if I have the follow disabled, it'll just kind of go on. And then if I hit F, well, now that we have this screen being chose to follow, when we get to the end of the timeline, we'll just see it update like that. And I could also have an option for a stationary cursor. So this way the cursor stays in the center and the whole project just gradually moves along. So a couple of options that you could have for auto scrolling there, and you could turn that off and on by hitting the F key on your computer keyboard. Okay, so it says, Greg, can you go over Beat Detective style quantize for a full drum track? So let's go ahead and do that. So I think we could do it right on this project. So if we wanted to clean up drums, one of the things that we would like to do is let's go ahead and I've already taken all my drums and I've selected them, and I could right click and I placed them. I chose to put them into a folder. So we could say, move selected tracks to new folder. I've done that already. So if I wanted to solo the folder of drums, and let's turn on just our click track here. If we listen to the timing, so I just hold down Alt Shift if I want to bring them all up. Listen to the drum fill. So this isn't quite as tight as we would like. Ideally, it may feel fine in context, but a lot of times we may want stuff to be very precise. So anytime there's going to be like a drum fill, it was a little late, and the snare fill is going to be rushed. So what I want to do is kind of just take a couple of tracks, maybe kick and snare, and in this track I'm going to take hi-hat as well. So I will double click, and we want to go through and go to our hit points, and let's adjust our threshold here. And the goal is to find our hit points without finding all the tracks that are bleeding through. So if I wanted to look at my kick drum here, so it's not picking up on the snares in between. I will do the same for my snare track. So I will click on edit hit points, and let's set our threshold, because I don't want necessarily like the hi-hats to be picked up. So when we look at this, I can see the tracks bleeding through, but I really want the hit points to be just on where the snare hits. And in this case, I want to do the same with the hi-hat. So I will adjust the threshold so it's only kind of catching the hi-hat and not the kick that's bleeding through. So once we have those kind of, I'm going to just work with the kick, snare, and hi-hat. What I want to do now is just to go into this little icon on a folder track called Group Editing. And once I have that done, now I can edit all these tracks together. We see in the upper right-hand corner, I'll just set my quantize value here, but we have our quantize settings. We'll click on the edit the open quantize panel, and now I could see all of my different drum tracks kind of laid out for me, and I want to have different priorities for different drums. So these are all so I want maybe my kick to have the highest priority, my snare to have second highest priority, and let's scroll down over here, and maybe my hi-hat to have the third highest priority. And why we group these together is if I quantize just the snare tracks individually, the snare track is still bleeding in the hi-hat and overhead mics. So if I shifted the snares without affecting everything else, it would lead to all sorts of phase issues. So at this point, we kind of have defined our priorities of how we want to see the drums. I will click on slice. You may get a message if some of the tracks are slightly out of time. I'll just hit continue. So what it's done now is it's sliced each of those, it's created, hundreds and thousands of slices for all the drum tracks based on the priority of those particular settings. Here, I want to choose my quantized value. I'll say 16th notes. I could choose to do like an iterative quantization. If I wanted to, I could do audio warp, which would stretch. But what I want to do now is click quantize. So what that's done is that's shifted different events around. And sometimes you may notice that it's going to put a gap. So if the event was late in time or early in time, it may just shift it over and put a gap. At this point, we click on crossfade, and that will fix those gaps. So now if we want to listen to our drums with the click track, so that fill was much better on time. And then the drums are much cleaned up from what they were previously. So that's how you could kind of do beat detective style quantizing of your multi-track drums. So hope that makes sense. Okay, so we'll move on. Question, is exporting an AAF file from Cubase, then importing to Pro Tools the best way to make those two DAWs work together on the same computer? I think that's the best way of migrating files back and forth. Some people will make sure that all of the files are created into stems and make equal length stems for finding, so some programs still don't import AAF. But that's a pretty foolproof way of getting your files and fades translated from between multiple DAW programs. Okay, so let's see. Greg, you may have answered this last week. How do I import a sample that I made of a snare to show up in Media Bay so I can recall it when I want to use it? Anytime that a file is recorded, I could come right over, let's say I'll just create an audio file. Let's make a mono file. And I'll just call this special snare. And let's pretend I just did an audio recording here. And I have this track armed. So now I have this particular audio file, and we'll call that special snare. See if my program's going to misbehave on me. All right, so I have this as an audio file in my project. So, and at this point, it's just any audio file. I could choose to place it, go directly to my media bay. And let me I think it's probably just going to go into this particular folder. I could go to my file browser. And I think I'll just check my path here. So let's go to my pool window rather. Okay, so it's going to be into my documents folder here. So I could just say it's good documents, and I have it under projects, and I will go to Amos Moses. Let's see, I guess let me see if I can find a folder here really quickly. But basically, it's just going to show up as an audio file. And then at that point, let me just see if I can find. Okay, so it's going to be in this folder, and then it will be into audio. And now I could just say, here's my special snare. So I could just drag that from my media bay. And if I really like this particular file, I could right click and I could just say add favorite. So if I wanted to navigate quickly to it, I could say these are favorite snares. I could quickly go to my media bay, click on favorites, and say, here's my favorite snares. And then I could just see that particular folder. And even if I have a sampler track, I could just say, okay, let's load my special snare file directly in. And that way, that's how you could organize it on your computer pretty easily and access it through media bay. It says, hi, Greg from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Question, is Cubase looking to do an automated track volume control set in specific range like Vocal Writer in the future? I haven't heard of any plans for that. I know a lot of people will just kind of tend to use compression, but I'll go ahead and try something to see if you wanted to work within like your automation to be within a specific range. Let me just see if that is something that we could do easily using the Project Logical editor. So I'm going to just select a node here. You may be able to kind of fake it a little bit with Project Logical editor. So you can kind of choose to say, okay, I want to multiply by 0.9. Yeah, so you could choose to kind of multiply within a specific range, but let me just see what that does if we can. Okay, that's going to change the position. Let me just set this to trim. So it's not I haven't heard of any plans to do like an exact kind of vocal writer thing, but a lot of people will just use a compressor to kind of regulate the levels and find that works well. Okay, question from, are there alternative keyboard shortcut mappings available? I would love a template that gives me shortcuts I'm already familiar with. Example, Adobe Premiere or Audition. So there's a number of different key commands that are available, and they're kind of freely floating around. So Cubase will come with some from other DAW programs. So if you go to your key commands, you could, you have your default keyboard shortcuts, and those are pretty easy to work with. Let me just... check something out here. Give me a second. So if you go to your key commands here, we could just see that you'll have, a lot of different key commands, but there are presets for other DAWs like Sonar, Pro Tools, Logic. But you could make your own key commands as you kind of see fit and save them as presets. But I don't know of anyone that has like key commands from Adobe Premiere or Audition. But you could definitely make them and save them and have your own kind of customized key commands at your will. Okay, so we have a question. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you've learned a tip or trick today, please feel free to give a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Okay. Question, is there a way to apply musical mode to the audio samples controlled onto a MIDI track? My MIDI tracks have audio samples, are gaining or losing tempo depending on the pitch of the key. So I'm just going to reread this again. Is there any way to apply musical mode to the audio samples controlled onto a MIDI track? My MIDI tracks that have audio samples are gaining or losing tempo depending on the pitch of the key. I'm just making sure. So it says your MIDI tracks that have audio samples. So okay, so it really could depend upon, when you have stuff that's set in, just seeing if I'm making sure that it says your MIDI tracks to have audio samples. So let's say we have something like a sampler track. Let me just kind of come over here quickly. So I can go to my media bay. And let's say if I have let me just set this up quickly again. Sorry. All right, let me just check my connections one more time. Okay, so if I have this as my sampler track, so it could really depend, and I think if I'm understanding your question, so like as we, it says my MIDI tracks that have audio samples are gaining or losing tempo depending on the pitch of the key. So, you could just have this, check if you click here, you could just say you want this to be in audio warp mode, and you could have it sync to tempo. So probably a lot of samples will do this, where you could play back the sample and it's not going to change the tempo, and it's really maybe a function of the sampler. But maybe, Dennis, if you could just reiterate the question, maybe slightly different if it's working with a particular sampler or with the sampler track, that would be helpful, and I could probably help a little more. Okay, so it says I have external destinations full of samples, but media bay scanning only few of them. All valid files I can use if I drag and drop. Any ideas? Okay, so in your media bay, one of the things you could check if you have a lot of different samples is I think there's a preference So go to Preferences, and let's go to Media Bay. So you could have, here you could have 10,000 results, maximum files in your results list. And I think you could go up to 100,000. So if you have a lot of different samples, try upping that to 100,000. So I've seen that help people. But also when you get to different folders, like if I say, let's have it look in my Nuendo sound effects folder, that, you also make sure that all of these folders in the media bay are able to be, are selected, because, sometimes I see some people put in folders, you could rescan the disk, and sometimes people will choose not to include the internal subfolders. So make sure that those are visible. And so, if you could kind of drag and drop, but do that. And sometimes it could take a while, if you have a lot of different sound effects. I've recently rebuilt one of my studio computers, and it took, a little bit, because I had, I think it was 97,000 different samples and audio loops. So it could sometimes, as it's scanning and doing its indexing, but make sure that, that you don't have the results limited to 10,000, and that may just do the trick for you. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. Hope you're staying healthy and safe. In Cubase 10.5, is there a method or Cubase plugin that will create random changes to the resonance filter in a retrolog analog bass pattern? So I think we could do that. So let's come over here. Okay, so let's say I just have kind of a retrolog bass pattern here. And if I just wanted to do, let's say, resonance. So what I want to do is I'm going to open up a MIDI insert on this particular one. And let's open up just a MIDI control. And what I want to do is I'm just going to assign this particular resonance a MIDI controller. So let's put it on control 17. So I will now right click here and let's learn CC. And if you have a controller keyboard, you can do this, but now I'm just going to spit out this MIDI CC from this MIDI plugin called MIDI Control. We could go ahead and load up an Auto LFO MIDI plugin. And now as I want to play this back, we'll enable the Auto LFO. And I want this to go to MIDI controller 17. We could have it randomized. We could kind of set the range here. So as I hit play, let's see if I have this. Let's set this to something slower, maybe like half note. So this way, controller 17 is spitting out within this particular range to half note triplets, or I could do whole notes. And you can set different shapes. So without that, we could just say, now it's going to be a constant on a resonance. So that's a quick, easy way. So you want to tell what controller it's doing, and you could just do that directly from the MIDI control plugin, and then just set up the auto LFO, and that way you could have it kind of randomly change different parameters. And you could do that for multiple parameters as well. Okay. Hi, Greg. Question. I have a problem with my analog hardware. Issues bus making, and I have a zoom on my monitors. So I have a problem with my analog hardware. I'm not sure if it's issues. It's ISSUS bus making, and I have a zoom on my monitors. Maybe if you could reiterate that question. I'm not sure if it's an issues bus or insert bus, and if the zoom is the hardware or what zoom hardware it is, if it's an audio interface or if it's like a portable recorder, that would be helpful. Okay. Just reading through a couple comments here. Okay. Okay, question. Is it possible to record an acoustic instrument in Cubase in several layers, several velocities, or do I need Hallian 6 for this? So you could definitely record, any MIDI source in different velocities. So let's say if I have... let me just switch this patch to just add a MIDI track to this. You may hear my son practicing in the background. And let me just... just find an acoustic sound here really quickly. Okay, so I'll just pull up some brass. Let's put on sustain here. And I'll adjust the volume up so you guys can hear it better. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and solo this, and just going to reread a question. So if it's talking about MIDI, so I say when you say acoustic instruments is several velocities. So I'm assuming this is MIDI, but you could do this. And I'm just using Hallian Sonic SE, and I'm loading up a patch from Iconica. But as I just come here, I could just say. So, and as we play that back, we'll see all the different velocity levels automatically kind of engaged there. So if it just... So you don't need several different layers for several velocities to do that. You can kind of do that with most instruments, and some instruments will be more velocity sensitive to samples for kind of having more musical expressiveness. So, but if I'm misunderstanding your question, just let me know. Okay, question. I'm busy building a template, and as it's my first, it's better to make one small scale, bearing in mind I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, PC Intel i5 4-core processor. a lot of times what you could do, it's a lot of times what you could do with templates is kind of build them up. And as you work with different templates, you could select tracks that aren't being used, right click, and you could choose to disable tracks. And once you disable tracks, those tracks aren't taking processing power. Obviously, it's great if you have 128 gigs of RAM and an i9 or a fast Ryzen processor. But you could kind of scale it here by, if you're not working with those particular tracks, you don't necessarily have to have them loaded up, taking computer memories. And when you need to access them, just right click and then you could enable those tracks. So starting off a template, you could do that. And, if you have a smaller system that's not the most advanced, that's one way you could build your template to be a bit far, to get more out, to get more out of your template with a smaller processor. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. When creating drum loops, I place audio samples on various tracks, kick, snare, etc. Is there a way to swap out, replace all the samples in a track with a different sample? So we'll show you a trick with this. There's a great kind of replace sample function. So if you have one kick sample that's being used kind of repeatedly in a project. So let's say if I want to solo this. So I have that, I'll turn that down to kill. So if I go to my media bay, I could come over here to loops and I'll just say, let's find kicks. So now what I could do is drag it over and hold down the shift key. And you'll get this little setting. Do you wish to modify all events that refer to the same material? Say yes. And then now we'll replace every instance of that particular kick. And you can do the same for snares, sound effects. So I think that's a pretty fast and cool way to replace all the samples on one track with another sample. Okay. Okay, question from Robbie. For someone that do simple mixes at times, if we're trying to widen the mix sounds, should we be planning ahead to use stereo tracks instead of mono? It really depends on the particular project, I would say. At times, you may have, a very scaled back project and you may just kind of do, widening like the classic, piano on one side, guitar on the other, and kind of spread your drums out. That's a classic way. Or using, stereo mono tracks, like, background vocals are a great place for this, where you could take multiple background vocals and pan them hard left and hard right, so they don't necessarily have to be stereo or mono. So it really depends upon the instrumentation of the particular track. But I've never really found myself, if I'm in a mixing stage, I've never really found myself where it's like trying to make sure I have stereo tracks to work with. You could always duplicate a track and pan it hard left, and to duplicate hard right if you needed to have more flexibility. But I haven't personally come across where I've thought of, I better have this stereo in case, because, you can have different settings in different scenarios, and every song I try not to approach the same way. I try to approach what's best for the song. That's how I've always kind of worked. So, okay, question. Hi, Greg. I have a UR22 and I can't find my activation code for Cubase AI that came with it. The support simply doesn't reply to me. Do you know if I can get a replacement activation code for AI? If you go through and probably do send a support request form if you haven't done that. That generally works pretty quickly, and they could find out with the serial number. And if it's helpful if you include the serial number of your unit, because they may have to. Sometimes if a unit was returned from a store, it could be that the activation code was lost. But, if you have this serial number and, maybe send a picture of the receipt or an email of the receipt, that could speed things up for you. But, you could submit a support request form from your Steinberg from your My Steinberg account. If you run into more problems, if you let me know what country you're in and include your email, I could pass it on for you to see if we can get it expedited for you. All right. Question. Video will not show in video player after hibernating computer, but still shows in video track when project is reopened. Even though it does show in player, excuse me. Even though it still does show in player when first importing video. I'm not sure if there's much that, sometimes it could be a power management scenario with your computer. So I've seen sometimes where maybe a hard drive doesn't quite wake up if the video is playing off of like an external drive. You could... I think maybe if you come over here, if you hit F8 again to open the video window. So say if you come here, that should kind of reset the video display. And it's also, if you see that you need to build a thumbnail cache, I think if we go to your studio menu and I think maybe if we go to studio setup, or let's try going maybe into the pool window for the video file. Here you could also, I think there's a way to automatically kind of write the video to have the video window kind of rewrite the thumbnails. So if you generate thumbnail cache, but I haven't run into that. And if you could let me know if that does it with all videos, and maybe you could adjust your hibernation settings, and it could be kind of like what we're talking about before. One of the things that you may want to do if you don't have it, and if you're on Windows, is maybe come over here to your VST audio system, and there is, if we go to on the Windows platform, you'll see like a power scheme, and make sure that you have the Steinberg power scheme selected, and that may help that issue as well. Okay. Okay, so just seeing a question. Can automation points snap to grid vertically? This particular can help with sync-based LFOs, i.e. switching from 8th to 16th notes. So, what I see a lot of people do, so say if I wanted to snap my automation, and I could be misunderstanding, but I'll give it a shot here, is... Let's just say I'll just draw in some automation here, let's say for this, and let me adjust this point down. Sorry. So let me just see if I have my snap turned on, if the automation. And I could just say adapt to zoom here. So let's just see. So like if I have adapt to zoom on, and here I could have kind of the automation to snap. So I have snap turned on, and as we kind of zoom in further, if I wanted this particular automation point to only fall on, let's say 16th notes, I could say use quantize. And if I have that to 16th notes, I can now adjust the position to 16th notes. So if I wanted to be an 8th note or a 16th note, and then I could select that particular range and duplicate. So I think if you wanted to snap, let's say vertically, so I think that if that's, so that way you could have the tempo sync kind of work. So make sure that you have the snap turned on, and as you're editing, and depending, you could also just do adapt to zoom, and how far you're zoomed in, you could just select kind of your different points and have that point kind of snap to the grid. So if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Okay, question. In an orchestral composer's template, there's a choice of using automation lanes or MIDI clips for adding CC automation. Which would you recommend? I wondered if you recall which HZ uses for his. I assume HZ is for Hans Zimmer. And Hans is, last time I was at his room, he does a lot of stuff with, so if we have... he's been kind of doing his CCs for a long, long time. So how he loves his setup, last time I was there at least, I think generally he has a lane for velocity. Let me just draw in some musical nonsense here to generate some notes. And he's often remarked on how he loves to see his multiple controller lanes. So I think he has, often, one for expression. So if he has expression CCs, he'll have one for modulation. And then one for main volume and velocities. So for him, like as we work with this, I think he kind of has it set up kind of like that. And, you'll see all of his notes, just kind of his sequence kind of going like this. And this way he could choose to, because what he does is kind of just write the automation in. And as he wants to, move MIDI parts, the CCs are tied in, and there may be reasons to use the automation lanes, but I think from watching Hans work last time I was at his place, it was pre-COVID, he really loves being able to kind of envision his multiple controller lanes and velocity in his MIDI editing in Cubase, and that's kind of what he uses. Some of the reasons why some people may want to use if you go to your CC automation setup, is if you wanted to do a lot of stuff with like Bezier curves that you have in the automation lanes. But a lot of composers, they just, this view of, expression, modulation, volume, and velocities, the four key components that they want to see. And that's how most of them work. Okay. Okay, going through different questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Question: does Mixer Snapshots save all the plugin settings so you can compare different EQ mixes? How do you save snapshots in projects? I seem to lose them on reopening a project. So if we have like a Mixer Snapshot, I'll just kind of come over here to one of our other projects that make a little more sense. So, and I'll do this in kind of the full mixer view. We could do snapshots in this docked mixer as well. So when you come over here, we could click on our mixer snapshot. So I will, first thing I'll do is hide my input channels. So as I work with this, so say this is maybe like my base point that I'm working from. So I will click on snapshots here, and I'll call this bass. And let's say I want to take all of my drums and I want my drums louder. And I'll just say, let's go to drums up. And now I want it to come here and adjust the EQ. On my drums. And let's say, I'll take another snapshot. We'll say drum EQ. So I'll just come here, drum EQ, bass up. And let's say if I wanted to put inserts on all of my drums, I'll just come directly here. Say I wanted to put, I'll just hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, and I wanted to put a magneto on all my drums. So I'll just come here, and we'll put the analog tape saturation. So let's go ahead and just take our output and our high frequency adjustment. So let's say I'll just adjust the saturation on the different drum tracks here. So let's say now if I just want to recall like my bass snapshot, I could just right click here and I could say, let's, at this point, I will just recall this snapshot and we'll see that the magnetos and the EQs will go away. If I wanted to come here, I could just say, let's recall this snapshot, all the EQs that are there. And I could say, let's recall this snapshot. And if you right click, you could also do different snapshot recall settings. So if I wanted to recall this snapshot, but without the channel EQ at this point, I could just come there. And as I recall this snapshot, you could, have different components. So if I wanted to, again, say, let's do this snapshot, I'll just right click here. And I don't want it, let's say I start, I'll jump back to where we had no EQ. So I'll just recall that particular snapshot, or we chose not to do the EQ. So at this point, you could just compare different frequencies. And if I wanted to switch to different plugins. Let's say I wanted to have these all go to Quadrafuzz instead. I could now take another snapshot. So at this point, just come here. Let's recall. Boom, there's our magneto. And this is with all of the Quadrafuzz settings. So that way you could kind of pick and choose different elements, you know, so you never really have to make a decision in your mix. So it's really good for that. So, but yeah, the snapshots will save different EQ mixes, will save different inserts, different settings for you. Okay, question. I'm Cubase Pro user since Cubase 4 with USB key. What happens if when in future that USB hardware dies? Can I order a new one with my Steinberg user account? I have also Mode 2 instruments, iLock USB. So if your USB, and I've used the same USB e-licenser in my studio and the one I travel with, and I used to travel kind of incessantly pre-COVID-19. But I've used the same keys for almost 20 years now at this point. So I haven't, but if you bought a new USB e-licenser, a fresh one, at that point, all you'd have to do is just install both USB e-licensers, and then you drag the license from the old key to the new USB e-licenser in the e-licenser program. So when you come over here, you would just see kind of the different keys, and at that point, just drag the license from one key to the other key, and then you should be all set with that. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we have a question. Can I set up a headphone output with ambisonic in the control room while the speakers are stereo or 5.1 at the same time? So we had a question about this and kind of, you know, working with ambisonics files. So let's take a quick look at that. So when we want to work with like an ambisonics file, you know, we come over here, let's just do a new project. And what we want to do is to, within our connections, we'll go to our audio connections. And what we want is like probably just add a ambisonics bus. So say we add a first order ambisonics bus. I'll leave this not connected for now. We can go into your control room. I'll remove one of my mixers. And at this point, I can add a monitor setup with ambisonics. Okay, and we'll choose for this to, you know, I'll just set this up for first order ambisonics there in my control room. So even if you have different configurations of stereo, I will add an audio track. Let me just add an audio track and let's make it ambisonics. And let's say I just want to drag over kind of like an atmosphere type of thing. So now when we go to edit, you know, we could see, you know, we could have our tracking. So we see kind of a rear view that we could place. But we want to make sure, that this is going out to our ambisonics bus. So we could kind of move this around. So we can see kind of a top view or a bottom view. And I think what we need to do in the main area of the audio connections is just to, in the outputs, select this and right click, and then we can make this the main mix output. Then once that's done in the control room, that here what you want to do is just and we could do this kind of in the headphone mix. So let's add in our audio connections. Let's go to your control room and let's add our headphone. So even though if you have different configurations, we can go to your phones and now that will automatically have the VST Ambisonics decoder plugin. And now you could set it up for head tracking. So if you have, if you want to do it for speakers or for headphones, so that would allow you to kind of monitor your ambisonics source. So you can give that a try. So that way the headphones will be going out kind of, and you could just do it like that. So once you have that main ambisonics bus set up, then that just gets loaded into the phone's channel in your control room. Okay. Okay. You see a question. I bought Cubase Elements like 3 weeks ago, not noticing that they had just changed it only for Windows 10. I use Windows 7. The thing is that I don't know how to get my licenses again to install it in Windows 10. Generally, if you have already activated the license, it's not going to be, if the license is activated, when I went from Windows 7 to 10, I didn't have to redo any of my soft E licenses. You may have to, reinstall the Steinberg e-licenser program, and that's a good thing to do after an operating system update. But I would try just to reinstall the e-licenser and see if the soft e-licenser is still there. And if not, just go to your My Steinberg account and you could request a new activation code. So I don't think you'll have any problems. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to insert a specific plugin in the next slot available through a shortcut? I don't think so. To do a specific plugin through keyboard shortcut, I don't think so. I'll take a look and see if it's under a different function. Here, let me look at some of the key commands. Just look for. I'll just keep looking. I don't believe so, but sometimes I'll discover new functions. Searching through plugins for some different functions like this. Yeah, I don't know of a way to do that, but I'll see if there is any clever macro I could do, but I don't think that there is a way for a very specific plugin. Many people will save like a track preset or an effects chain preset that you could kind of drag and drop in. Okay, so just see a question, how can I change the bitrate for multiple import of audio files? So we covered that a little bit earlier. All right, so we have someone apologizing that they're late to the Hangout. There's no tardy that you'll get, so you don't have to worry about it. That's why you can come anytime you want. Okay, so question, thanks for another Hangout. Question, could you give an overview of the different pitch time stretch algorithms and which ones work best for which functions in Cubase? So there's a number of different pitch shifting algorithms, and we could think of it as kind of two different families and three categories within one of the families. So we have kind of our legacy settings, and this is used for earlier projects and for some of the pitch shifting algorithms. So we may notice that we'll have a standard solo, and that's going to be used for very audio processing and pitch detection. And these will be kind of set for some of the, mainly for compatibility, and the names are pretty evident what they're for. So pads, drums, vocals, mix, custom. And then you're going to have the elastique. And these will be broken down into three different categories of usage and three different families within that. So we can see that we're going to have the default stretching algorithm will be the Elastic Pro Time, but we also have formant preservation. So that's formant is often what makes it like if you don't have formant protection and you raise or lower, that kind of gives it, it's often called the Munchkinization sound of when you have something very artificial coming from like going where it seems to change gender from male to female and it sounds weird that way. So if you run into that, that's when you'd want to use formant preservation. If you have an older computer and you're doing lots of real-time time stretching and pitch shifting on your tracks, you'd probably want to use the Elastic Efficient. So we're going to have more efficient, better formant preservations here. And these are kind of the default. Now, each of these has three different modes. There's going to be time, and we could think of this as being for more rhythmic material, pitch for more harmonic content, and tape. And what tape would do is as you slow down the tempo, the pitch would slow down, or you speed the tempo up, the pitch speeds up, just like in like a very speed control on an analog tape recorder. So those are kind of the different modes. So a lot of people can leave it on elastic time and never have the need to really switch, and that's fine. So, but if you want to do like tape stop effects or, like I've had people that have recorded something or they have analog transfers and the speed of the tape machine was too slow and it was off pitch and they wanted to bring that back, where we've been able to kind of, bring the correct pitch back from the tape machine that was transferred in error, or maybe that wasn't calibrated, and you could use the tape for that. So that's a quick overview of some of the different time stretching and pitch shifting functions. All right, so let's move on. Thanks again for all the great questions. Okay, so seeing just a comment from Taylor, I should have specified delete space, workspace in 9.5. Delete option I showed is not available in 9.5. I will see if I could dig up I don't have 9.5 on this particular computer, but I'll look, Taylor, if you wanted to send me a message over email. You can send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'll see if there's a way in 9.5. I'll boot it up on my personal studio computer after the Hangout. Okay. Okay, so I see, hi Greg, how to use an outboard gear in Cubase. So if you have outboard external effects processors, and if you have like Cubase Pro, all you'd have to do is we go to your studio menu and let's go to your audio connections. And from the audio connections, what we want to do is click on the external effects tab. We want to connect the external processing gear, whether it's a compressor or EQ or reverb unit, as to our audio interface or to our converter. So ideally, you'd want to have a converter or an audio interface with multiple inputs and outputs for this. So let's say if I have an LA2A and I wanted to, so I would add external effects. You could type in a name, whatever you want it to be. We will choose what connection to our audio interface or converter that signal is going to. So I'll just choose not connected here. I don't have a lot of available inputs and outputs in my audio interface I'm using for the Hangout today. And now I select a file, I go to my inserts. And at this point, I choose under external processing, we could just select your particular outboard gear. And as we have our outboard gear configured, realize that by the time we send it out of our interface through our converter into its signal path and then back again, that signal path could impose delays or latency. Excuse me real quick, I'm going to cough. So what we could do is choose to ping the system. We click on this icon, that will measure the signal path of that and will automatically compensate for the outboard latency of the external path. So once you have that, then you could just go directly into your favorite outboard gear and have access to it still within your software environment. So we have a lot of people that, have 64 channels of converters just to incorporate external processing gear. And they love that they can do it within Cubase or Ondo very easily. Okay. Just seeing just a question. Can you add a cool drum? If you want me to do that, maybe if you could leave just a comment later what type of drum you want and what is cool to you, that could be helpful. Okay, let's just go through. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. If you've learned a tip or trick, feel free to go ahead and give a thumbs up to the video, and you could make sure you're subscribed to the channel and get notified of different hangouts and different events. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing a question. Hi, Greg. If in 10.5, if I have multiple instances of FabFilter plugins, Cubase crashes, is this a bug or could I be doing something wrong? I don't know. I don't have any of the FabFilter plugins, but you might want to see if, as you're doing it, you could go to like your real time, if you go to your audio performance and see, if you add a couple of plugins, if you had 2, 3, if you see this start to creep up, you could do that. Also, as you add a lot of FabFilter plugins, one of the things you may want to do is to just go to your audio interface and adjust the buffer size up and see if that makes a difference. But I think, we have people run lots of FabFilter plugins. I haven't heard of an issue. So I would check those two things and maybe just your CPU's getting spent with all the settings. And if you have the choice of, I'm not sure if they have VST 2.4 or VST 3. If you have the choice, make sure you're running the VST 3 as well. Okay. All right, so you see Fujimoto from Atlanta. Good to see you on the Hangout. Okay, so seeing question, I accidentally recorded audio in 44.1K, but the sound card works in 48K Yamaha TF. So when the digital mixers, all the audio file became out of tune. Is there any ways to convert the audio file so become in tune again? So if you've done that, let me just experiment with a particular file. You could try to go to your pool window. So good, try going to your pool window under media and come right over here and just right click. And then, you could just, there's a couple of different ways. One is to, convert files. and see if you just convert the sample rate here, and like this particular file is kind of set up to, but try to do that. Select it, right click, and go to convert files, and from convert files just try to adjust your sample rate and see what that does. I would maybe make a copy of the file just in case before doing it, but you could maybe experiment with a different file and see. But I think that will get you to where you need to go. Okay. Okay, question. Why is it when I pull a video into a Cubase, the audio plays fine, but the video doesn't? Is there something video-wise I need to change? So video could be, if for those of us that have been working with WAV files and realize that WAV files can be interchanged so easily between different programs, with video, you're going to have different containers and different codecs. And if you just go search for video settings in Cubase, you want to make sure that you have the best, and depending on the file format, it's not just an MP4 file isn't an MP4 file. An MP4 file, sorry if I can't speak today, but an MP4 file basically could be multiple variations of that. So depending on the container and the codec. So if you go to the Steinberg website, you can check to see which ones are kind of optimized for Cubase, Nuendo, Wavelab, and Dorco. So as we work with that, you could do that. And sometimes, I was helping someone on Facebook today that when they imported, the video was longer than the audio that was extracted from it. And it ends up that the video converter that they used added 2 extra frames or something like that on the conversion. So you might have to just go back and have it done depending on the file format with the right container and codec. And it's kind of an unfortunate thing of how video works. It's not like WAV files. So I think if you get the right container and codec, and there's plenty of freeware programs that will allow you to switch between, I have this file converted to this container, this codec, and this file format. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. Please show how to make reference tracks from Control Room, please. Okay, so let's take a look at a project where I have this kind of set up. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Okay, so let's come over here, and this is a very powerful thing to be using in your mix process, is using reference tracks. So if I have a track here, and I wanted to use this as a reference to another track, and I'll just EQ this track very badly so I won't get a YouTube message. All right, so let's say I've done just like the worst EQ in the world on this particular track, and I wanted to just solo this track. So we applied nasty, inappropriate EQ settings, but let's say this is my reference track. So I've imported it into my project. Now, as we work with reference tracks, the gotcha is a lot of people load a reference track into their project, but the project is still going through the master effects processing. And then you're kind of taking a mastered, finished project, and then you're recompressing it. So it's kind of giving you a false perspective of what's going on with that particular track. So I'm going to come over here, and in my control room, I'm going to just set up a bus So I'll just add a Q mix, and I'll just call this reference. And you could use any Q mix that you want, and we'll make it a stereo. So right now I have a Q mix that's set to reference. I want to take where this particular track is, and I'm going to, instead of sending it to the stereo bus, I'm going to send it to no bus. I'll go to the Q send, and I want this to go directly to my second Q mix, which is going to be the reference. So now as I play back this particular project, I hear this track is playing, but it's not going. But let's say if I select to listen to Q mix 2, that's this track, and only that track. So now I could listen to my mix versus the reference. So only this track is going to this bus, and now this is my internal mix. So inevitably, if you have clients are always like, make it sound like this record, make it sound like that record, this record has more bass, this record, and it's, at this point you could take the particular file, load it in, and not send it to the master bus, send it to the Q mix. And again, we set that up just by going into your studio menu to audio connections, adding a Q mix, sending your reference track, taking that particular Q mix there, send it to no target, but to send it out to your reference Q mix, and then within a control room switch. And then it's such a, could open up so many, ears and eyes as you do that, having a reference that's kind of a true reference source that's not being sent through the mix bus. It's not going through your master effects processing or parallel, anything like that. So, okay. So I see, hi Greg, greetings from Washington, Pacific Northwest. Sent my question to the Club Cubase email. Hopefully I sent it to the right email. So I think we'll get to some of the emailed questions maybe in about 10 minutes or so. So I know we had some of them, but the email address is going to be just clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay. Okay. So I'm just reading comment or question. I cannot find the settings and preference. If you hover over the track, that it zoom in on this selected track, so that the data file get bigger of the automation, etc. I'm not sure if this is what you're talking about, but if we want to come here, there's under the edit menu, there's an enlarge selected track. So if I'm here, any track that I select will get enlarged like that. So if I had just kind of look down and I select this track, that track gets larger. So I'm not sure if that's what you want to do, but you could try just doing, and it's really helpful if I think maybe what you're looking for is edit enlarge selected track. So I will take all the tracks and let's make them all a bit smaller. So once I have that setting set, just to kind of show it in a little more context, I could see all of my other tracks, and as a track is selected, it'll become larger. So I'm not sure if that's what you're wanting to get to, but if that's it, just go to it's not found in preferences, just little check marks on edit enlarge selected track. Okay. Okay, just saying a question. I just got one main bug in 10.5. Always freezes after closing certain projects, but I think it's something to do with my acoustic audio plugins. It could be. Sometimes plugins don't release the memory. I saw on Facebook someone mentioned that, they always had Cubase freezing and they're really irritated. And they traced it down to like an old rewire driver, and then once they removed that, everything worked perfectly again, and they kind of felt silly for blaming Cubase for this, and it was kind of an old rewire driver that was causing it. So that's something else. It could be stuff like that, but you could definitely try to see to see if you could narrow it down to your acoustic audio plugins. Okay. So I see a question. Will lower zone key editor ever get its own height adjust separate from the mixer in the lower zone? What I've known people that have done for that particular scenario is save different workspaces. And I think if we save different workspaces, that we can kind of get around that. So let's say I come to my workspaces. Let's add a workspace. Okay, so I'll just hit OK. And let's say if I'm in a MIDI track and I want this to be larger. So now if you wanted, and you could assign keyboard shortcuts to these. So let's say when you go to mix console, you say, and then if I go to my MIDI editor, it used to work, I think. Just try that again. So I think that used to kind of work. Let me just. But I'll pass that along as a suggestion as well to kind of have independent heights, because I often find myself wanting a little more space in the lower MIDI key editor as well. Okay. But try in your version as well, and maybe if it's set to a global workspace, if you set workspaces, to see if that makes a difference for you. Okay, just going through different questions. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. I hope everyone's learning a tip or trick. Okay, so I'm just seeing disk cache load on my project is full. How can I clean up the cache, please? Thanks. I don't think I've had to do that in a long time, but maybe if you go to, perhaps if you go to your media menu, to your pool window, and maybe just, remove missing files, that might help. But I could do some more research on it. But try, if you have a bunch of unnecessary takes or audio files, try to just go to your pool from the media menu and try to, again, just remove unused media and see if that helps. Okay. I just see a question. Greg, can you say shalom in Hebrew? Probably not. I probably mispronounced it, but sorry. I'm kind of a bizarre question. All right. So let's move on. Okay. All right. So I see a question. I use different quantize. So when we open up the quantize panel, we need to export and import this file in the future instead of saving them. So is there a way to update in the future? If it's for future versions, I think that if you go to your profile manager, and I could be misunderstanding your question, But if you go to your profile manager, I think that will save your quantize presets as well. But if you have your quantize, let's say if we go to your quantize panel here, and let's say if I just kind of drag a MIDI part in, that when we click here, we could save the preset. And then as we kind of look over here, you could, like I saved a preset earlier, but you could do that. So I think that if you're looking to carry your presets over, I think there's a quantize XML file within the preferences, but I'm pretty sure that they're also saved within the profile manager. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. I have a Mackie Pro FX 16 version 2 connect to Behringer 404 HD, and on my mixer, I've connected my Yamaha Master Keyboard and Korg Kick and Korg FM and Minilab Arteria, but I get some sound, but not all. Let me just take a quick look what the Behringer 404 is. Let me just, if that's a synth. I'll just Google it real quick on my other computer. Okay, so it looks like the Behringer 404 is just an audio interface. Let me just make sure. Okay, so it's an audio MIDI interface. All right, so you have Mackie Pro FX 16 connected, and on my mixer, I've connected my Yamaha Master Keyboard, a Korg Kick FM Mini Lab Arteria. But I get some sound, but not all. So make sure that, it could be with your Mackie mixer that you need some of them. If you're trying to do a stereo out, that's probably pretty easy to do. But if you're wanting to do like the Yamaha source, 2 Korg sources and an Arturia synth, like 4 analog pieces, and if you wanted to record them separately, you may have to have the Mackie mixer, through maybe inserts is a common way people used to do it with older Mackie mixers, or look for a way to, if you wanted to record those 4 different devices as audio directly into Cubase, you could do that, but you need the ability to bus individually out of Cubase or out of the Mackie mixer into the individual input channels. So you may have to have different analog inputs configured for recording it as audio. So you could check that out. And one of the things that you could do also is just to, some people will just connect directly to US, to the audio interface, and you could have external instruments. And that way you could load up a VST plugin that's going to an external instrument. So you say, I want to add an instrument, and it's going to my external plugins, like a montage, and I could add that track. But it sounds like maybe you have to make sure that the the audio output from each of the devices is getting sent to individual inputs on your Behringer 404. And I think that's probably where your problem will be. Okay. Thanks again for all the great questions. Okay, so just seeing discuss drum replacements. I think we've done that. Just reading through some of the discussion. just seeing a discussion that Mark Rabin's helping someone. Let me just Thiago Cabral. Let me just see. I think. Sorry, see if I could kind of trace this discussion back a little bit. Okay, yeah, just kind of a generic discussion. So I'll move on. So it's so it seems like maybe Thiago. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Is maybe having like cracks and pops with your Focusrite interface. So I'm not sure if you've tried raising the buffer on that. But there could be a lot of other little issues as well. But all right, so we'll just kind of move on. So I see a question. Hi, Greg. Do you know if multi-touch technology is being developed for Cubase? I use a touchscreen to control the mix console. I think, I've had a couple people email me with questions. I think there's a product called Cubazen, like Cubazen. That's kind of like a touchscreen interface controller. So I think, there's other companies doing it. So you may want to look at that. I've had a lot of people kind of call me up asking me about it. It's not necessarily a Steinberg product. So, but you could maybe look at that. Okay, so it says, I recently updated my Cubase Pro 10 to 10.06 version. My RevX, free from Steinberg UR, stopped working with the e-licenser expired issue and cannot be repaired by any solution. So, sometimes you could have the RevX on a soft e-license or directly onto or directly on the USB e-licenser. So if you have it on the soft e-licenser, try dragging it over. Since you have Cubase Pro, try dragging it to your Cubase, USB e-licenser if that's not the case. But I haven't had any problems accessing, my different like RevX plugins. So if I just wanted to come here to an insert, all my RevX plugins kind of show up and work by default. So I haven't had any problems, but if it's just merely a licensing issue, try just, taking the soft e-licenser and dragging the soft e-license and transfer it to your USB e-licenser. Okay. Okay, my timeline just jumped way down. Bear with me for a minute and I'll find. Sorry, at least once or twice I hang out, my timeline will just jump way down. Maybe it's kind of run out of time and there's a lot of questions for me to get to. Okay, just let me see. Okay, so I see I use different quantize. So when we open the quantize panel, we need to export and import this file in the future instead of saving them. So is there a way to update in the future? So I think we covered that. Okay, so all right, so I think I'm finding my place again. All right, sorry about the. Okay, just reading through comments. Sorry, it's taking a second to. All right, and so it's wonderful seeing other people helping out people in the discussion. So. Okay, so I'm just kind of seeing more of like Thiago's discussion as it's kind of developing. So I was just curious, Thiago, if you play back the same project with just a built-in. I think you indicated you're on Mac, but if you play the same project with the built-in audio, if you're getting the same kind of cracks and pops. So if that's one thing to try as a control. So all right. So another question: what's the best way to split a stereo track part into two channels that's already in the project? So if I have a stereo track, let me just go to my piano. I'll just go to my piano left right here. And if I just select the particular file here, so I'm going to select it at the track, go to my project menu, and let's go to convert tracks, and I'll say multi-channel to mono. So we could, at this point, do it just for the selected tracks or all tracks and hit OK. And now this is added directly below it. Just my piano left and my piano right, and you could choose the different naming convention. So click on the track itself, go to your project menu, and make sure that you don't have the actual event or part on the project window, but just from the track. And then just do a convert tracks multi-channel to mono, and you could do the opposite as well. Do a stereo, a multi-mono to stereo. Okay, so see a question, another question for the future. Will the IC Pro app be updated so that more things can be done? For example, moving the EQ, changing a plugin, etc. I know it is complex, but do you know something? I haven't heard of any plans for the IC Pro. I was supposed to go over to Germany in March of this year for a meeting, and that probably would have been in my discussions. But the meetings got canceled with the pandemic, but I could see if I could find out. But I haven't heard of anything definite on doing some of this stuff. I think the intention is often to make it a little easier for remote stuff and not try to replace the keyboard and mouse so much. So some things, maybe like if you're recording yourself, you need to be behind your drum set or in front of your guitar amp. That it's really could be intended for that, but I'm not sure what the future plans are for it. I haven't been made privy to it. Okay, so it says, what would be the easiest way to process, let's say, 6 drum sounds from Beat Agent in parallel, applying some glitch effects using included effects in Cubase, also being able to automate them. Thanks. All right, so let's come over here. Let's go to new project. And I'll just load up an instance of Groove Agent SE. Okay, let me just find something. Let's see if this has different patterns in it. All right, so let's say if I just have this kind of play. if I wanted to do different like stutters and some glitch stuff, so I could come over here. One of the plugins that's really helpful, and I'll just stop that for a second while I get the plugin loaded up. Sorry, is just if you go to Loop Mash FX, you could just kind of pop right over here, and at this point you could set kind of different pulses to and notice it just looks like a piano keyboard because you could actually play it in real time. So they'll give you an idea of how you can start playing around with different stuff. So, okay, so it says, second question is how we can convert wave guitar to MIDI because Cubase can convert only single notes. So at this point, Cubase is only designed to convert audio to MIDI for monophonic devices. But if you had Melodyne, which some people use for that, you could use that through ARA to do your detection in there. But I haven't seen like such stellar results for monophonic stuff working so well where it sounds good. Okay, so any way to trigger multiple samples with a single note, Slate Trigger 2 style. I know away from Groove Agent, but it is not very efficient. So if you wanted to, trigger multiple sounds from one particular, note in Groove Agent. So something that a lot of people miss is when we come over here, let's just go to my inspector. So let's say if I have, I'll come over here to my instruments. And I think if we just come here and I could just assign different trigger notes. So if I say I'm on E1, I could just kind of right click, but you may have to unlock this. So click there. And now I could have this, just right click. And then we could say, edit, learn trigger note. Then you could trigger kind of, multiple sounds from the same MIDI note. So that's a pretty easy way to do it. Okay, so is the question how to color multiple tracks at once. So let's come over here. I'll add a number of tracks. So if I wanted these all to be the same color, I could select all the tracks here. Go to my color menu, say I want them all to be this green. And you could also hit Alt-Control-C, and you could leave this color up at all times. So you say, I want those tracks to be this color, or Option-Shift or Alt-Shift-C. Then you could just, select, if I want these tracks to be, different color. So that's how you could do it. So just kind of select your multiple tracks, and then you could just Alter Option plus Shift plus C, and then you could just kind of choose your colors accordingly. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for all the great question. So see, Greg, I think this is going back to the our kind of beat detective style quantizing. Greg, does doing this in Cubase keep the relationship between mics intact like in other programs? Yes, it does. So it's completely phase accurate with that. So you don't have any worries. Okay. So it says, I'm using Cubase LE10. It does not support the lane functions, does it? So I think if it's for like a MIDI part, that there might be a workaround. I know this works in Elements, so it may work inside of LE as well. So say if I have a number of parts and they're all, let's say, stacked on top of each other. Here's something that you could try is if you look at if you kind of hover over, you'll see this little triangle down here. And then you might be able to just select your different takes here. So you could say if I split, then you can say at this point, I wanted that to be take 2, and I wanted this to be the first one. So you could give that a try. But I know that works in Elements, but I haven't tried it with like Cubase LE. Okay, so to see, okay, so it says when working in group edit mode, I occasionally have to make changes to a single track, so I ungroup it. Even though this doesn't change the length, when regrouping, I receive a not aligned notice, and the track can't be group edited anymore. I think it could still be group edited, but you may just kind of get the notice that you could ignore. But if not, I've never had a problem where I just kind of get the warning message, but it still tends to work. So, okay, going through. Okay, so just seeing a question. I can't get the draw tool to define a new downbeat when I'm doing tempo detection. I have the signature track, but it doesn't draw. What am I missing? So let's go ahead and do a quick tempo detection. And thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so if I wanted to just come here, and let's say my click isn't aligned with the material here. So what I could do is select this particular file and come over here, and let's choose to go to my project menu and do a tempo detection. We'll analyze. And I'm just going to do an offbeat correction. So, and the question is, they can't have they're not having the draw tool kind of work and to define the 4/4. So if I want to do that, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'll switch tools. And now I'm just going to make sure I have this snap turned on. I hit the letter J. And then just kind of just drop it in just like that. So it seems pretty. So it's, just seems, make sure it seems like wherever you are, kind of just drops it in with the drawing tool. So it seems like you're doing everything right from your description. But, make sure that, see if you have try, see if you enable snap, because here, if I don't have snap on and I'm trying to define it, it could be dependent on your snap. So hit the letter J, and then try dropping it in and see if that makes a difference for you. Okay. Okay, so let's just go through some more questions here. Okay, it says, hey guys, I recently downloaded Cubase, but the plugins that should be there aren't there. Is there a possibility I can download them now? So, usually when you get the full version of Cubase, try installing from the full downloaded file. There's an update file, which assumes that you have some of the content already there. And that could install the application, but not all the content. So I think if you do, depending on I think Cubase 10.5 is like a 21 gigabyte download. So you could just simply go for the 25 gigabyte or 21 gigabyte download to make sure that you're installing from there. And then all the content should be installed for you. But if not, you could just send me a message at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay. Okay, so your question, hi Greg, how can I use Audio Warp to adjust vocal timing? So let's go ahead and open our project. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so I will just kind of take this vocal here and I'm just going to duplicate the track. And I'll just quickly consolidate this just to make editing a little easier. All right. So now that I've done this, and let's say I'll go into my Audio Warp, and then I'm just going to enable free warp. So if I wanted to change kind of like the rhythmic timing of particular phrases. You wished it all away, and I'm left here for a all right. You wished it all away, and I'm left here for a... So if I wanted to just kind of come here, I could click and kind of put an anchor point, and put in our anchor point here, move that. So let's say, okay, I just want to put a point here and I want that to fit into that amount of space. I want this to, so you can kind of place an anchor point and then move based from there. So you can say, I want this to fall exactly on the beat here or that. And you could just kind of rhythmically, so if someone was a little bit off timing wise, you could stretch your vocal here and probably just destroyed it. But what did you say? So say I wanted to take the word say, and we just put in our point here, and we'll kind of just zoom in, say, okay, I want this point here, and I could just move that directly to being on the beat. You say, you say, you wished it all away. So you could change kind of the rhythmic timing and feel of different tracks like that. All right. Okay, we have a question. Does Cubase come with Neve plugins? We're the only company that actually has plugins that are authorized by Rupert Neve himself. So we do sell we have the Neve Portico, the 5043 and the 5033. So they're the only Neve plugins that are authorized by Rupert Neve himself. It doesn't come with Cubase, and they're separate purchases, and they are fabulous plugins. And they're kind of done using VCM technology from some of our colleagues at Yamaha, from Dr. K, who's a renowned DSP programmer. So those are sold separately. So while there's a lot of stuff that kind of leverages the brand name of Neve, none of them are really authorized except for those particular plugins. We do have in our audio interfaces, like the URRTs, actually come with Rupert Neve Designs transformers. And if you have our AXR interfaces, the AXR4T or the AXR4U, one's Thunderbolt, one's USB, those have Rupert Neve Silk modeling as part of the hardware as well. Okay, so let's go through. Okay, just going through some different questions and comments. It seems like you guys have these great conversations and that I'm always way behind on in the Hangouts. Okay, just saying comment. Greg is the mother and father of Cubase. I'm not smart enough to actually develop anything in Cubase. I just kind of show what a bunch of really smart German guys do. So I wish I was that smart. Okay, so I just see a question. And what about the Stay at Home collection? Is this the AI version 2? So the Stay Home collection, I think it might still be going on. I just checked. I thought it was ending last Friday, but if it's still available, that's the Cubase Elements version. So I'm seeing a question like how to structure a song, please. There's many kind of song forms. A pretty typical one would be, so let's say if I come here and wanted to listen to, just knock this vocal up. If you wanted to, an easy way of kind of doing this is to add like an arranger track. So as I would add like an arranger track, here we could say, this will be intro, maybe verse 1. Some writers will have like a pre-chorus, maybe a chorus, verse 2, chorus, bridge, chorus, repeat, and so, and now what we could do is if you hold down the Alt or Option key, you could actually label these. And this could give you kind of an indication. So as you kind of look at your song arrangement, and then you could drag these up and change the order as you see fit. But, different music will have different forms. Okay. Okay, question. Can you show how I can use the sampler to convert a drum loop into MIDI notes so I can use my own samples of instruments? Okay, we could do this pretty easily within Groove Agent. So let me just open up a Groove Agent project. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Okay, so let's say if I have a drum loop here, Like I have an empty instance of Groove Agent. And I have drum loop going on. So I could just drag this to an instrument pad here. From the instrument pad, I will select that, and we could trigger the whole loop. And I could click on from the edit tab on instrument, click on slice, and then hit create slices. And now I'll just make this just a little louder. So each slice has now been mapped to its own pad, and it's created a pattern pad. So now if I drag this pattern pad over, I could drag that directly onto a MIDI part here. So at this point, and let's do some quick variations on that. So I'll make some copies. And we could double click here. So let's say I just want to see velocity only. And I will scientifically do a variation. So now I could take like the original drum loop and I could play each of these notes from my MIDI controller if I wanted to, but now I could just have the exact sequence done. So I could take the original drum loop. If that's it sliced, and this is a variation. So that's kind of an easy way of doing that within Groove Agent. Okay, so you see a question, how can I take one MIDI groove track in my project? So I think if you wanted to like take the feel like of that MIDI part, if you open up the quantize panel, so you just click on the E to the right of the quantize, and then just drag like that file in, that you'll have the quantize preset. Hi, Greg. Would you know anybody we could bribe to bring out a combined selection tools mode for Nuendo? I think it's coming soon, but if you want to send me money, you could bribe me, but it won't really actually make a difference. I know that the developers are working hard on getting that functionality for Nuendo, so it'll be coming soon. So okay. So I see a question, is it possible to rename MIDI CC in the piano roll? So if you're here, we could see, like if I have controller 16 doing something else. So right now you're going to see the MIDI controller names, but I was just kind of having discussions about that with some of the planning managers to be able to rename, and then it gets into discussions of if that should be saved for each project or but I was just currently we can't do that, but I've had discussions with some of the planning people and marketing for that particular feature. So I see, Greg, can I get a Cubase mug, please? I think they might sell it in the Steinberg online shop. Sometimes they have it in Europe, and they don't bring over some of the cool mugs and stuff. So when I go to the office in Germany, I try to steal a mug every time because, to have my morning coffee in my Cubase coffee cup. So, but if you're in the U.S., I might be able to do something if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Our office has been closed, so we might have to wait for our office in Buena Park, California to open up. But if you're in the U.S., send an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and we'll see if we can do something. All right. Okay, see a question. What's CC mean in MIDI? CC stands for continuous controller. So within the MIDI specification, like a continuous controller would be like modulation, main volume, expression, and you often see them kind of represented in different functions here. So that's kind of what often you see these little controller lanes, and that can help you be more expressive with your MIDI. Okay, question, how can I transfer a vocal track to MIDI? So let's come over here. Just jump back to this project here quickly. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. So we could do this kind of functionality in Very Audio. So I will just take this and I'll just consolidate it, make it a little easier for me. So once we go to our Very Audio tab here, I will just have it do its analysis. And under functions, we could just choose to extract MIDI. And we could incorporate the pitch bend data into VST3 tuning curves, which will be more accurate than standard. And so at that point, it will now just at the very bottom, here's your MIDI track from your vocal. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. How do I insert time between MIDI parts in the key editor, Cubase Pro 10.5? So let's say if I'm in, let's say this piano part here. I think if I set my left and right locators, and then if I go to, let's see if I do it from within the editor or if I need to do it on a project window. So if I just kind of do from the project window here, if I grab the range selection tool, I could now just grab so select with the range, and then I could just insert silence, and that will just kind of knock it over to the right, I believe. Let me just check. So we'll undo. Yeah, so at that point, just select the range, and then you could just select it there. If you really needed to see within the MIDI editor, you could go to the in-place editor. And if you don't see the in-place editor, go to your track control settings, and then you can make sure that the edit in place is active, and then it'll just kind of show up here on the project window. And as we would select, then you could use the range tool here to select a range of the MIDI. And once you have that range defined, just come here and insert the silence, and everything kind of gets knocked over a couple bars to the right. Okay, so I see question, is it a bug that the play bar is lost sometimes in the editor? If it is it going to be fixed? It's annoying that I play it blind. It could really depend. Check to make sure that if under transport, if you have the video follows edit mode enabled, sometimes that could have an effect. So sometimes when I get questions like that, try going to your transport and check the use video follows edit mode and try unchecking that. So question, hi, is there another place to activate constrained delay compensation outside of the mixer view? So directly on the lower on 10.5 in 9.5 and earlier, it was up in the upper left-hand corner. And with 10 and 10.5, it was moved down to the transport bar here. So you could activate the constrained delay compensation in the lower left-hand corner in 10 and 10.5 and the upper left-hand corner in 9.5 and earlier. Okay. So if you come late to the hangout, you don't have to apologize. That's totally fine. And again, we do it a long time, and this is why we record them, and people could always watch. Okay. 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 So we had people that emailed some questions in advance. Let me get to those before I forget. Okay. I kind of created a project so we could do this a little quicker. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. I hope everyone has learned a tip or trick. And if you have, please feel free to give a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, feel free to do that as well. And you'll be notified of, different hangouts as they occur. So let me just revert this quickly. May have destroyed it a couple times through our presentations today. Okay. Says, is it possible to have Cubase's chord assistant list mode to insert all chords in a cadence progression into the chord track? I mean, insert or inset and let us move them horizontally across the chord track. So when we have kind of a chord track, it's tends, there isn't a way to necessarily, say do everything in a cadence or everything in a chord progression. From the chord track itself, you can load up different presets for the chord pads. So if you wanted to have kind of a way of, so if I have a chord track here, let me add a chord track first. Then I can say, my song is in the key of, and there's different, chord progressions here for the chord pads. So let's say I want it to be major scale key of A. So here's all my A chords, and then you could just drag directly from the chord tracks themselves just to be able to, trigger different chords. So while it's not necessarily laid out, you probably want the chord pads and the chord track to be, in sync with each other. So maybe that would be a way to kind of solve the issue that you've run into. Okay. So it says a question. This is maybe a continuation of a subject we kind of touched on where I had a brain cramp last week. It says attached to the files pertaining to my question about the most recent clip Cubase. The issue was he wanted basically to have the guitar tablature constrained to 3 to 5 frets for scales, melodies spanning 3 octaves. And I'd forgotten how to do it, and I should have just total brain cramp. But if we have guitar tablature and we wanted to move to different strings to kind of constrain our latency here, or constrain the fretting of different notes. So let me find a better guitar patch than that. So just give me just a second here. Just choose. So if I wanted to look at this in my notation view and I wanted to actually change to different strings, I could just select, and if I wanted, there's not an automatic way to say keep it in this position, but it is quite easy just to kind of say, I want these, notes, and you could choose to move to different strings if you wanted to. So whatever notes that you have selected, I could say, let's move it to string 4. So you could do that, but it's not going to be kind of an automatic, I want it all within one particular, position. But again, you could just kind of select the note here. And if you wanted to just move to the next string, to the previous string, or build trills, just try right clicking, and then you could choose what particular string that note's tablature will be fed to. Okay, we had this question about a macro. These are always kind of fun to work on. Let me just see if I have this macro handy somewhere. Okay, so let's say if I have an audio example, like an audio file, let me just find one quickly. I might have one in a pool. Let me just check. No. All right. Okay, so let's say I have a file like this, and what I want to do, and it says, I was wondering if someone or advanced Cubase users could help me to complete a macro, repeat a selection with a range tool, and have the 3-second silence between the repeats, and decrease the gain, say -6 dB for each time. So this is kind of what I do when I'm bored. I kind of make Cubase macros. So I'll just place this here. And what we want to do is I'll switch my master time to seconds. So I want to grab my range selection tool. And if you want to add 3 seconds, I'm just going to select kind of my start and end. And when I look at this, I could just say the range time, I want it to be 3.00. I'm sorry, the range length rather. So I will draw in just some random range time, and I'll say, let's make this 3.00. So I'll just hit 0 in the info line. Then what I want to do is I'm just going to extend that range to the beginning of the clip. So what we want to do is to take this selection, duplicate it, keep that 3 seconds of pause, and then decrease the volume by 3 dB. And I actually chose to do it, or by 6 dB, but in my macro I just did 3 dB so we could see it a little easier. So what I did is I made a macro, and it's just 4 steps. So I go to my key commands, and as we go to the key commands, what I want to do is, I think I called this copy and lower volume. So I chose to choose edit, duplicate, and then for each dB that you want to drop in value, and you can do this 6 times, just choose audio decrement event volume. And every time you do that, that drops it down by 1 dB. So now I will just go ahead and trigger this macro a couple of times, and I'll make it a little larger so we could see it as we do this. So I will go to my edit, to macros, and I'll just choose copy and lower volume. So there, and I'll do this a couple times. And you could assign your own keyboard shortcut to this. And I'll just do it like 1 or 2 more times. So now as we do this, it's just taken that one file, and every time it's added 3 seconds of pause and then lowered it by 3 dB, but you could set it to 6 dB as the original question asked. So again, to have that executed as a macro, we could just come over here and we go to our key commands, and I just used 4 steps to duplicate the range, and then the audio decrement event volume. Okay. Okay, so it says, I have a ton of projects I made in Machine, which works a lot like FL Studio with patterns and such, with all sorts of sections and parts laid out, and would like to be able to hit record on multiple Cubase MIDI audio tracks and then hit play in Machine and essentially have it write everything it plays in Machine into Cubase. My workaround is okay, which is just to export every MIDI track as an audio file into Cubase, but then I have this weird issue of it either not playing, not trigger sounds. In the other Machine groups, I really just want the MIDI and audio both to write to separate tracks, and just call the selected sounds in Machine. I suck at routing MIDI and VSTIs to separate tracks. It'd be awesome tutorial. It's really been frustrating. Let's take a look at this. I'm not familiar with Machine. I don't have it. But I'll come over here to, I think I have a copy of a similar thing set up with Groove Agent. So I will come here and let's look at my Groove Agent. So I will just kind of play. And so let's say I have a pattern here. Okay, so what I want to do is, sorry, let me just mute some other sources here. Okay, so what I want to do basically is to record MIDI and audio simultaneously out of Groove Agent, and a lot of people don't think that we could take mono sources out. So what I've done is I have Groove Agent loaded up here, and Groove Agent can have 32 stereo outputs. So when I go to my mix console and I'm hitting play, I can see I have my kicks and my snares, and all of these kind of isolated to different groups. And how we do that is just by selecting my kicks, and I'll say output 2, my snares to output 3, output 4 to my hi-hats, output 5 to my room, and output 6 to overheads. So let's say I want kick and snare to be mono, hi-hat, room, and overheads to be stereo. And then what I've done, so I have these outputs. I've added 2 mono groups and 3 stereo groups. And then each of these will be routed out. So when I go to my kicks track, I could come right over here. So let me just come here to like the audio characteristics. So let me just click here. So I say that my kick track is going out to group 1, the snare track out to group 2, the hi-hats to group 3, which is going to be a stereo group. Group 4 will be overheads and rooms. Now I created 5 audio tracks, 2 mono and 2 and 3 stereo. So my kick will be a mono source, and its input is coming from group 1. Group 2 is the snare, and that's so the input of this channel I labeled snares coming from group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. Now on the Groove Agent track, I have put Groove Agent as its own MIDI out. So Groove Agent is smart in that it will actually generate its MIDI output in real time. So when I come here, I'm going to, as I play, I can see the outputs of Groove Agent are going into the buses. I will arm these tracks for record. And I'm going to arm the Groove Agent track for record. And now I'm just going to hit record. So you can see the MIDI is being recorded onto this track. And let me just activate my room mic here as well. So now when I stop, all of my tracks will be recorded as MIDI up here. So when I look at this, we can see all of our MIDI data for Groove Agent. And if I want to, so there's all my MIDI parts. And then if I want to see all of my audio as well, I could just select those. So, and if I play back just the audio, let's say just my kick and my snare, my overheads and my room mics. So my room will kick in. So that way, as Groove Agent just played, so again, route the outputs from your drum device into multiple outputs. Take those outputs, route them into groups. Take the output of groups into inputs of other audio tracks. Hit play, and then you're recording the MIDI and the audio. And again, if you do a mono group to a mono track, a stereo group to a stereo track, you could have your kick and snare and hi-hat in mono, your rooms, overheads in stereo, or however you choose to do it. So try that again. So and once you kind of get it set up, you could save it as a preset so you could call it up at any time. All right, let's go through some other questions. Thanks again for all the questions that were sent in. If you want to send them in advance, you could send them over to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay, so we had a question. In the MIDI editor, the lower part of the window there to edit velocity, modulation, CC, etc. is always small, low height. Is there a setting to set default height? I seem to remember that the height, when the edit the same MIDI screen but edit other MIDI section to the window is back to small height, the default size. It seems that the height is neither stored in the project because when we reopen a project file, the height is back to small height. How the height of the MIDI controllers works is it's going to be based on the individual part. So if I come here and for this particular part, and let me just duplicate this down here. So I click on this part and then I click on this part. If I had changed the height is preserved. So, and if I come to this part, let's say if it's on the track, I think it's going to be individual parts. So it's going to be on a track basis. So if I come here, I could double click and that would be tall. And I will go ahead and just save this. And if I open up that project again, so I'll close this project here and I'll open up the project that we just saved. So we double click here, that's still tall. So it seems like, before when I'd done it, that it was kind of done on a track by track basis. So I think that's kind of the intention because different tracks may have different CCs, but I can see where you may want a default track height to be a little higher, and I could pass that along. Okay, question. In the manual, it says that it's possible to record the output of a MIDI modifier to a track in real time. So, for example, I could set a modifier to change all notes to conform to G Locrian scale. And then any notes I play on my keyboard would automatically be changed to G Locrian and recorded as such in MIDI format. Is there a way to do this with existing MIDI data? For example, an 8-bar phrase. I want to apply the modifier to change the MIDI to G Locrian mode and then record that to a track as MIDI data. So a real easy way to do this is if we have, let's say I have a C major scale here, and I just have this part selected. So we'll play this and I'll unmute it. Hopefully that should sound better now. So if I go to my MIDI and we could go to our transpose setup, here I could choose, okay, I want to do scale correction. So I want a G major scale to now be a G Locrian scale. All right, so now, or C to C. So now when I do that, it'll now just shift all of the notes to conform to the scale by the MIDI transposition. So that's an easy way to do it. So again, go to your MIDI to transpose setup, and then you could employ scale correction there. All right, so I just got this right before the Hangout, and I haven't had a chance to really check it out. But it says we spent 6 hours trying to get VST Connect. I'm on Windows. They are on Mac. Both have the most recent version of VST Connect installed via direct download, Steinberg site. But performer is able to connect. The performer is able to connect to the session. I can see and hear them, and they can see me, but they cannot hear me or the Q mix. I hear and see the sound in every Q meter, including the one located by the talkback box at the top of the VST Connect window. I do not have the Q mix outputs connected, as when you set up VST Connect up, it disconnects them, but I hear audio, so plugin must be working right. The performer is using a built-in audio device with headphones in Mac laptop with no sound card. The volume is up. They've tested by streaming a video. I double-checked config in every form and support post, and nothing helps. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are my only hope. The one thing I would check, it's obviously not ideal using it on kind of a built-in audio interface. But it's the built-in audio device with headphones. I've seen sometimes where, connecting headphones can switch the sample rate on Mac. So that could be something to check within your audio MIDI setup. And if they have anything else that's kind of accessing that, but you could, if you could maybe send a screenshot. I know you posted this on a couple of Facebook groups, but maybe, make sure you don't have TalkBack enabled on your setup. I've seen that kind of foil a lot of people. It sounds like you've been pretty extensive with this, but if you have maybe a screenshot of your VST Connect and your control room that you could send, that would be really helpful. Okay, so it says, hello, Greg. I hope you're well, as are your family. We're doing great. Thanks for asking. Says, I just bought a new computer and installed Cubase 10.5. I'm temporarily using my motherboard's own sound card as my sound card, a Realtek. When I plug headphones into my computer's audio jack, I can hear music from YouTube, for example, as well as a DVD player, but the voice of Cubase will not listen, even though I have adjusted the output Realtek. However, the Cubase master output shows that there is sound on the track. What could I try next? Greetings from Finland. And he was nice enough to, or they were nice enough to send a screenshot of their setup. And I noticed that when the screenshot, and I sent you an email, but just for the benefit of others, when you inserted the headphones, it actually switched it to the Realtek digital output. So it seems like the sound card may have thought that it is going into, maybe you're connecting a cable that would turn on or enable SPDIF. So, and it's a little different on Mac OS, but if you go to your studio setup and go to your control panel for your Realtek, you would probably see a little setting here where you could switch between maybe like the HD, routing the audio to the digital connection to an HDMI connection, or to like the headphone connection. So make sure that you switch that to the headphone connection, and I believe that will resolve the issue for you. All right, let's go back to our live feed and see if there's a couple more questions before we wrap up. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions that people have submitted. Okay, so we have, please teach how to create a drum kit with Groove Agent in a safe way so you don't lose the used samples. Okay. So let's say I come over here. I will do a new instance of Groove Agent SE. My son's starting to go a little crazy outside, so I'll have to wrap up pretty soon. Okay, you can probably hear him having fun. Okay, so let's get to my media, and I just want to go to loops and sound. So let's find a kick. Okay, so I want that kick, and let's find a snare. Okay, let's make that our snare. I'll just put it onto D1, and let's find maybe a clap. Okay, and maybe a hi-hat. Okay, so now I have my, just, all right, sorry, just, all right, so let's say if I just trim this to be just one kick. All right, so now at this point, I will right click and we'll say export kit with samples. Let's call it May 20 or May 19. You could put your own name in if you want. So let's say Alan Morgan did the kit, old friend. And this will be for 80s pop, let's say. All right, so. And I'll just save it to my desktop. Okay, well, these are protected. But then all you'd have to do is when you go to load up kits, you could go to load kit with patterns, and then you'll just be able to see it there. I kind of used some of my own samples, but let's say, so that's why I didn't, but that's really all you'd have to do. So if you kind of use samples that aren't, so just kind of right click once you have the samples in, and then choose to export kit with samples. Okay, we'll see if there's a couple more questions and we'll wrap up in a couple minutes. Okay. All right. See, it's always great to see people helping out other people and hang out. Jazz Dude is always very helpful. It's appreciate it. Okay. So I see about shared copies. I think we discussed this in the last one, so I didn't figure out how to. I will keep working on it to see if I could take a non-shared copy and turn it into a shared copy. All right, so okay, it says, hi, I'm from Canada. Can you please show me when we record the vocal and audio track with keyboard? We use one mono input and one stereo inputs after the recording. How can we enhance the voice effect? You know, so if you have just a vocal file, I'll jump back to the uninvited song here quickly again. You know, so sometimes, you know, when using, like if you wanted to have different effects, like for the reverbs and have that be in stereo. I'll just revert this quickly. Okay. Okay, so, you know, if I wanted to just take my...
What did you say?
So I'll just come over here to my sends and...
You wished it all away.
And then I just go to my sends and right click and add a, you know, add an effect send, such as like my reverb here. And then you could have, even though it's a mono track,
For 1,000 years and a day.
you can still have your stereo effect. So even though, you know, so if you import an effect on like a stereo effect, like a reverb that should, you know, sound nice and wide, and you put in an insert, it would follow the channel configuration. So try just going to your sends and right clicking, and then you could drop in your effects. Okay. So I see a question: how to make 8D audio? So I just kind of read about that. I saw like a news article on 8D audio. I'm not sure what it is. I didn't read it. Kind of sounded more like marketing stuff. But you know, I'm not sure what the eighth dimension is. But I'll try to do some research on it. But we did discuss kind of ambisonic stuff earlier. Okay, let's see if we get one more question. Okay, so hi Greg, can you show me how to create a logical editor command to change the piano block chords to rolling so that they sound more natural? The quantized randomization doesn't get me there. I could see if I could try to get one for next time if you want to send me an email, but I don't think it's a logical editor. I think you may want to try some stuff with like the arpeggiators, and being able to kind of drop some stuff on the chord pads. But if you want to email me, but there's not like a logical editor preset to really kind of work with that, that I know of. And it's probably hard to do because different rhythmic values that could be needed. Okay. I just seeing a comment. Snapshots are great, but automation is not saved. That's true. And sometimes, I will do, um, all of my snapshots kind of before I start automating stuff. Just like a still picture doesn't store moving images as well. So same kind of analogy. Okay. Let's see if we can get one or two more questions in. Okay, so question: any way to use Cubase's 3 and Cubase Pro together, like analyzers, extra mix window, file sharing, etc.? I know some people use it as an extra monitor, depending on your iOS and your Mac OS version. But I don't know if how accurate the analyzers would be. So, but I know some people use it as an extra window. Um, okay. Let's see, there's one last quick question we get in. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. Can we assign MIDI note as Cubase shortcut? So if we go to your studio menu to studio setup, there's a generic remote. So you may have to click on the plus sign to add a generic remote. And if you wanted to come over here, you can define where your input and output connections are. And at that point, you could, this will be the MIDI message and what function it is. So we could come over here. So if I wanted to have this function, and we could choose just to do a learn. And now I could hit a note message. And then at that point, we could have the bottom message kind of come over here and say, I want this to be transport, and I want it to be device, and we could have this, start. So at this point, I could now kind of, if I did everything right, I could just have a MIDI note, just set up to trigger different commands. Okay, so just seeing, I have a question. When I open any VST to a track, they flash open and disappear. I have to click the keyboard icon in the track to close and open to show the VST. I have Cubase Pro 10. Try going to, I think if we go to preferences, it could be, make sure that you have this open effect editor after loading it. Make sure that that is checked there. Okay, let's move on. So question, is there a way to perform a glue event using the MCU controller? This is one of the things that came in 10.5 was a specific glue tool. So let's see if we could get that going. So if we come over here, I think there's some user definable functions. So let's add a Mackie control. And we add a Mackie control. You can have user function. So I think it's under edit. So you can have a user A button. And then I think if we just type glue, that then you could assign one of the user buttons to just do edit glue. So just seeing comment more than 200 viewers at one point. Yeah, so we had a lot of people, a lot of great questions. Thanks, everyone. So just seeing a question at Greg, a community, a German one. So I'm not sure, I've been to Germany a bunch of times, to Hamburg. So, okay, so just seeing how to use mixing console and sends as opposed to doing inserts. So if you wanted to add, effects via sends and inserts, like let's say if I have a number of audio tracks here. I'll activate this project quickly. And if I wanted to add, if I have all my drums here, I could have these channels selected. So just hold down shift and click there. And I could just right click and say, let's add an effects channel to the selected channels. And I could say, let's add a revelation. And now when I go to my sends here, the revelation's been added to all of the tracks. So if I wanted to, again, come here, say, okay, I wanted to add a delay, right click, and let's add effects channel to selected channels. And let's do the worst thing you possibly do, a multi-tap delay for all of our drums. And now that one effect will be shared, and you could have that across kind of all of your sends just that easily. So that way one effect could be used for multiple tracks and you could vary the amount. Question, how do I become a true Cubase legend like you? There's lots of people that probably know Cubase better than I do. But you just make lots of mistakes before other people. And, try to teach yourself one keyboard shortcut every day. Okay, just okay, question. Program selector not changing synth patches when using USB, Thoughts System 8 or DO5 or D5. So one of the things to make sure, so generally, program changes should be sent. The one thing that could be blocking it is if you go to Cubase to preferences and go to MIDI, and under MIDI filter is make sure that program changes aren't being filtered out here. They aren't by default, but that could be tripping it up. And make sure that the device itself is actually set to receive program changes. Sometimes devices can be set to not respond to program changes. Okay, so I see, hi Greg, how to easily use the favorites file. So if you have particular folders that you really like, let's say if I go into my file browser and I collected a whole series. Let's say like I just found some ambisonics files. So I'll go into here. I was on the Rode ambisonics library. So I'll just say, let's go to under projects, and then, I could take any of these files here. Let me just see. thought I put it in this. But, any one of these files, you could just right click and click on add favorite. You could give it a name. And then when you want to go to your media, just go to your home and click on your favorites, and then it'll just show up right there. So it's pretty easy. Is there any way we can remove vocal or any other instrument from existing track? There's some things which are attempting to do it, and it's still, I would say, very early proof of concept. It's a bit like taking, an analogy I used in a hangout a couple weeks ago. It's a bit like taking the eggs out of the cake. I've seen some stuff for vocal removal that works amazingly well, and then you do it on the next track with the same type of mix and doesn't do anything to the vocal at all. So, just seeing Greg question, that's really cool. In the reference track, can it work with my audio interface 2 in, 2 out? So the method I showed of using the reference track through the control room, you don't have to have any additional physical outputs. So yeah, it could work with the 2 in, 2 out. That's what I'm using for my interface for the Hangout. Okay. Okay, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. We've gone, I can't believe it's been 3 hours and 51 minutes. I want to thank everyone. This has been a really fun hangout. I hope that people have learned a couple tips and tricks. I'm going to have to go do some work with my son, make sure he's not mad at me. I think he stopped watching his show, but I was go hang out with him. But I want to thank everyone for wonderful questions. We'll be doing another hangout this upcoming Friday at the same time. We'll try to have the hangout. Indexed later tonight, so we could just navigate between different topics. If you learn something new, please feel free to give a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, do that. We want to make sure that everyone is please staying safe and healthy during kind of the COVID-19 era where we have to stay at home and, take your time and, learn some new things in your Cubase. I want to thank you again. It's always just a thrill being able to communicate with people throughout the world in this way. And I hope it's helpful to you guys that may be stuck at home inadvertently. But please stay safe, and we'll see you on Friday. Thank you very much.